Welcome back to the Help Not Harm Summit. I'm John Paulton, Vice President for State Alliances for Family Policy Alliance, and we appreciate you joining us throughout the day. Remember to keep commenting and sharing the video, spreading the word. If you're here, we know that you're excited about taking action, and that's what this panel is about. And I couldn't be more excited to be with some great friends and colleagues from around the country with some amazing experience and stories to tell about impact that they've had and lessons that they've learned. And I want to start with Jeremy Samick. Jeremy Samick is with Pennsylvania Family Institute, and more specifically, he works with their legal arm, the Independence Law Center. He's technically serves as senior counsel with both Pennsylvania Family Institute and the Independence Law Center. He's done lots of work on religious liberty, on human life, working on family issues, working to eliminate sex trafficking. Previously was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Air Force Reserve, and a number of other impressive legal experiences. But Jeremy has had a lot of work, especially in the education front. And Jeremy, I want to ask you and just invite you to share that in your work as a lawyer, I'm sure you've seen a number of ways that people really can make a difference, especially in the school environment. Why don't you just share about those experiences?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks to the Family Policy Alliance for putting this together. My name is Jeremy Samick with the Pennsylvania Family Institute. I want to talk a little bit about teachers, administrators, particularly in the public school system. We all probably are aware of some of the things that they are facing in that environment and ways that they can navigate the issues with LGBT ideology that's permeating the school system. And so we've represented, just in the past 2 years, 2 public school districts, 2 principals, and a variety of public school teachers and a variety of issues that touch on this subject. I want to talk about one of them in particular. There was a principal whose wife signed an online petition, and the online petition was simply to object to a drag queen story hour at their public library. And so drag queen story hours are where you have men who dress up in overly sexualized stereotype imagery of what they believe a woman looks like or should look like. And so she objected to that. And so there were people online who tried to dox them, tried to find out who these people were that signed petitions. And by saying this, I don't want you to be fearful of signing petitions, because those are good things to do. But they discovered that this teacher, or this woman who signed the petition, had a husband who was a principal at a local public school. And so the attention turned to attack this principal. And so the school district's response was to put out as much pro-LGBT and affirmation type of tweets and Facebook posts that they possibly could, but they didn't stop there. They also asked the principal to start putting out pro-LGBT, pro-affirmation messages, both to the general public and to the school community. And so when we worked with him, one of the things that we noticed is that there's a big disconnect. And so when you're a public school teacher, when you're an administrator, there's a disconnect between this idea of affirming somebody, affirming them either as a human being or what they believe in, versus your ability to be a good teacher, to be professional, regardless of what somebody's beliefs are. And so we asked both the principal, and we helped him and got him a religious accommodation and got them to stop forcing him to violate his free speech. But talking about the paradigm that we all understand when we talk about other concepts like religion, politics in the public school system, when you're talking to people who have different viewpoints, who have different ideological viewpoints from you do, they will understand that in order to be a good teacher, in order to be a loving teacher, in order to be a professional teacher, you don't have to agree with every single student in your classroom's ideologies. You don't have to agree with every student in your classroom's religious beliefs. You don't have to agree with all of their political beliefs. And the same thing is true with their beliefs about human sexuality. In order to be a loving, professional, civil, respectful teacher that wants all of their students to be treated well and to get a good education, There's no requirement that you affirm what they believe about the nature of gender. And so that's one of the things that I think is very helpful, not only for teachers, not only for administrators, but even students to understand whenever they're being told that they need to affirm somebody in order to respect them or love them. It's a false dichotomy. Use the analogies between political, ideological, and religious speech and religious affirmation so that people in the secular world who maybe are mixing those categories can understand it a little bit better. The same thing is true when you're talking about privacy issues. Privacy from the opposite sex is something that's obviously been in the court system. There's been litigation about it, and that's going to continue. A recent case, Bostock, said that they are not making a decision. In that case, they said, we're not going to make a decision right now on where we're going to land on these bathroom debates. And so there's continued litigation. But one of the things that as people working in the system need to be able to talk about is that a person's privacy rights, like a girl's privacy rights, don't depend on what a man believes about anything. Her privacy rights aren't contingent on what the man believes about religion, whether he's a really nice guy or not. And so here's just a quick story that you can kind of talk about in the school context to help people understand who maybe don't come from the same background as you. Everybody has maintenance workers in these public schools, and we all understand that male maintenance workers aren't permitted to go into the female locker room while girls are changing or using it. And the reason is not because we think that all male maintenance workers are potential perverts or rapists. Now, certainly having a policy like that would give bad apples more opportunity to do bad things, but that's not saying that all of them are bad or have bad motives. So what is the reason that we don't let the male maintenance worker into the bathroom or the locker room while the girls are using it? Well, the reason is because the girl's privacy rights to him do not depend, they're not contingent, they don't spring into existence or suddenly cease existing merely based on whether the individual in that locker room has a good intent to be there. The maintenance worker has a good reason to be there. He wants to do his job, fix a toilet, unclog a drain. He may have no bad intent to do anything nefarious to one of the girls while he's in there. But the reason we don't let it is because allowing the man in that restroom or locker room creates a hostile environment, not because the man himself is hostile or do anything wrong per se, but because her privacy rights are not contingent on what the man's intentions or the man's motive is. The folks, whenever they get into this debate, also often want to characterize you who are arguing in favor of privacy rights as maligning people in the transgender community for wanting to do this for nefarious purposes. And I believe this story can help you and be able to communicate truth in a loving way.
Well, that is really good stuff, Jeremy. If you had to give one piece of advice or encouragement as people try to get engaged and take action, what would it be? Yeah, I think I'm going to give a two-part answer. The first part is you need to stay informed through good organization. So if you live in a state that has a family policy council, follow them. They get good information about what's going on in your state so that you can be better equipped and understand what is going on in your community and your state government. But the second thing is a more global thing, and that is don't feel like you have to solve all of the world's problems. Get involved wherever you can, whether it's running for school board or whether it's going to a school board meeting or befriending teachers who have similar viewpoints that you and supporting them. You can make a difference through the sphere of influence that you have, whether you see the end result or not. But have a smaller outlook. Don't get discouraged by what's going on in the broader world. Understand that God has you in a time and a place to be able to make a difference. And to take joy in that. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy. We want to move next to Arkansas and joined by Jerry Cox. Jerry is the founder and president of Family Council, and he's been at that for a little over 30 years now, started in 1989. And I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Jerry for most of that time. And what Jerry has accomplished in Arkansas, especially in recent years, has been such an inspiration. In fact, we honored him in the Family Council and his team with one of our top legislative awards this year for passing a slew of pro-life legislation, some very important legislation that we're dealing with today particularly the legislation to basically control the surgery and cross-gender hormones that are given to minors. And in all of those experiences over the years, I know, Jerry, you've accumulated a lot of wisdom about how to be effective in communicating with legislators. And we'd just love to hear your thoughts on that today.
Well, John, thank you for those kind words, and thank you for having me on the program. It's my pleasure to be able to share some things that we have learned here in Arkansas. I'd like to talk, first of all, or primarily, about grassroots organizing among just the people around the state. I can say without any hesitation that the good laws that we have been able to pass here in the state of Arkansas would not have happened had we not had a good grassroots organization that was in every county, almost every city in the state of Arkansas. And so I'd like to talk about the effectiveness of that and how that works. First of all, I think many organizations have a big email list, or they have a big mailing list. And we send out alerts and we say, call your state representative, call your congressman, call your senator. And we really never know for sure if people actually did it or not. And so a few years ago, we decided to start what we call our Rapid Response Network. Now, one lady called and wanted to sign up for the Rabid Response Network. We said, no, it's rapid as in quick. But what we have done is we have identified at least 3 people in every state house district around the state of Arkansas who have pledged that every time we ask them, that they will contact their state lawmaker. And then they will also ask other people to do the very same thing. And then they will report back to us about the results of that contact. And that has given us so much more influence at the state capitol, because we can zero in on one particular committee member if we want to, and have all the people that live in his district contacting him. Or we can contact a whole committee, or we can just turn the network loose on the entire House of Representatives, or the entire Senate, or the entire legislature. And so what I find is, as I go to the Capitol to lobby on pro-life legislation, or the SAFE Act that had to do with gender reassignment surgeries and all that, a lot of times lawmakers don't much care what I think, because I'm just one person. But as one lawmaker put it to me years ago when I first started this work, he said, when you're at the Capitol, ain't nothing like hearing from home. And I've always remembered those words. He was a farmer from East Arkansas, and he just put it very bluntly that when you are a lawmaker and you hear from the people back home who vote for you, it makes a difference. And so I've applied that for all these years, and we've really seen it work quite well. In fact, this is kind of an amusing story that happened about 20 years ago. There was a state representative from Jonesboro, Arkansas, who made the public statement to the newspaper that the only reason that homeschool moms homeschool their children is because they're too lazy to get up and get them ready for school. And the homeschool moms in Jonesboro, Arkansas, just came unglued. And they said, the easiest thing for me to do would be to put my child on a bus and send them to school. And so they got together, they held a press conference on the steps of the courthouse in Jonesboro and denounced him. It was on TV. And then they loaded up and they drove 2.5 hours to Little Rock to make their voices heard, not just to the legislature, but to that one representative that had so offended them. And I was talking to that representative later on, and he said, Jerry, one of those ladies found me in the Capitol, and she was so upset that she actually grabbed me by the lapel and shook me until my glasses fell off. Now, I'm not recommending that we do that, but that's an example of hearing from home. And it made a difference because he had a bad homeschool bill that session, and it only got 2 votes out of 20 on a committee and just went down in flames because the people of Arkansas made their voices heard to the individual committee members. And that's why it's important that we have these grassroots networks, but not that we just have a grassroots network that we can talk about how many thousand people that we have on our list, but that we have a grassroots network that will actually do something, that will actually send a text message, make a phone call, or in some rare cases, actually get in the car and come to the Capitol in Little Rock or wherever it is and make their voices heard. That makes all the difference. And so when I look at our success over the years, I really turn and I look at the grassroots organization out here, and I say to those people, you did it. You won these victories. You made the difference. And some people might say, well, that's well and good if you have an organization and a full-time staff and you can send out all these emails and so forth. You know, it works the same way if you're 2 or 3 people trying to influence the city council, or if you're 3 or 4 people trying to influence the school board. It works the very same way. All you have to do is to find some people who will call their elected official or contact their elected official and tell them what they think. And then you as an individual can keep those individuals informed about the issues so that they can speak coherently to the elected official. But at the end of the day, it works whether you have 3 people, 300, 3,000, or 300,000. The principles are all the same. Ain't nothing like hearing from home if you're an elected official. And so that's the simple plan that we've applied. Now, let me give you an example of that. In 2004, we sponsored the Arkansas Marriage Amendment, which just declared that marriage is the union of a man and a woman. And we needed to gather 200,000 signatures in order to put that on the ballot. Well, we didn't have money to hire canvassers to go out and stand in the hot sun and gather signatures to put that on the ballot. But guess what? We were able to recruit 5,000 volunteer canvassers who went out and did it as a volunteer because they believed in it. And so in order to have a good grassroots organization, you really have to have an issue to build around and give the people something that they can go out and do. So if you have an issue that people are already pounding the table over, it's pretty easy to organize a grassroots effort around that and then mobilize those people to go forward and do that good work. I watched the homeschoolers, 1,000 of them come to homeschool day at the Capitol in Little Rock, and they bring homemade desserts for every lawmaker. And the lawmakers love it. And so our lobbying doesn't always have to be adversarial. It can be kindness and appreciation. But you know what those homeschoolers are saying? They're saying 1,000 of us came today and we brought you dessert. Please don't make us angry, because we'll be back and we won't be bringing dessert. And so there are all kinds of really cool ways to build those relationships with lawmakers and really make a difference with grassroots. Because when I walk into the Capitol, I'm not just representing me, I'm representing several thousand people around the state of Arkansas who think just like I do.
That is really good stuff, Jerry. And, you know, I was thinking what a treat it is to have you share with the folks from around the nation here now. You know, as you know, last summer you were speaking at our Family Policy Council conference, and the state leaders from around the country had lots of questions for you because of what you've accomplished and especially the wisdom. But if you had to summarize all of that, or if you just had to give that one piece of advice or encouragement, you've said a lot already, but what might that be?
I think the thing that people need to remember is that grassroots organizing makes all the difference. It doesn't just make a difference, it makes all the difference, because when it all comes down to it, lawmakers care about what people back home think, especially if there are lots of them. And I, for one, have sat in the gallery of the Arkansas Senate, sat in the gallery of the Arkansas House, and I knew that we had activated our rapid response network just that morning. And I would watch the staffers there in the chamber bringing in pink slips, message slips from people back home. And I would literally watch those pile up on the desks of the lawmakers. And I would sit in the gallery and watch them read those messages. I've seen them hold those messages up during a speech and say, my people want this, or my people don't want this. And so my message is grassroots makes all the difference.
That's great. And I'm smiling as you're saying that, because I've had that very experience, sitting in the gallery watching those slips come in as well. Sometimes just a handful can make the difference. So,
yeah.
Jerry, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
You sharing.
My pleasure.
We want to go to Virginia now, and we're joined by Candy Cushman. Candy is the Vice President of Grassroots and Communication Strategies at the Family Foundation in Virginia. In that role, she leads the Speak Up Virginia movement, which is aimed at amplifying the voices of concerned Virginia citizens. You may have also seen her on CNN, MSNBC, and other national channels. Before all that, she worked for 19 years at Focus on the Family, where she was one of my colleagues, and I had the pleasure of working with her as she worked on primarily education issues. But Candy has been involved in some huge education battles in Virginia, and we want to take a little bit of time to hear your stories about how that happened and how people made a difference there in Virginia. Candy.
Thank you, John. It's really an honor to be part of this summit. And as John said, I oversee grassroots efforts at the Family Foundation of Virginia, which has been around since 1985. And we are dedicated to advocating policies that strengthen the family, especially when it comes to issues like this one, where parents really want that right to protect their children and to weigh in on what's happening with their kids' education. But sadly, we are seeing those core rights seriously jeopardized here in Virginia. For instance, just lately, the state government is trying to force every single K through 12 school in the nation, regardless, mind you, of whether the local communities feel like this is going to best meet the needs of those kids, the kids in their schools. Regardless of that, they are trying to force them to adopt what really amounts to a radicalized form of transgender advocacy into every component of school life. However, the good news is we are seeing pushback from parents and entire communities on this. So I hope what I have to share with you today really encourages you that you can make a difference where you are, right where you live. And I really want to drive home 3 points today for you. First of all, I wanted to emphasize just the power of uniting around a proactive message that really unites people, unites the community rather than divides. Also, I wanted to talk about the power of one courageous action to really catch fire, so to speak, and ignite others, for others to do the same. And finally, my third point is the power of speaking up together rather than individually or in isolation. And let me just back up a little bit and talk to you about how some of those elements played key roles in victories we've seen here in Virginia for families and kids, and also to just give you a little bit of context of how we're dealing with this issue in our Commonwealth. First of all, in 2020, our state legislature passed a law that directed the Department of Education, or Virginia Department of Education, to develop a model policy dealing with transgender issues in schools. And then right on cue, the Department of Education this year implemented that. And let me tell you, this really is one of the most extreme versions of this kind of thing that I've seen. And John mentioned that I had worked on Focus on the Family for some 19 years, primarily on education issues. So that's really saying something. But just to name a few problems with this policy, It provides actual instructions, this is in the policy written out, to educators on basically how to keep secrets from and really just outright deceive parents when it comes to gender identity issues with their kids that their kids are dealing with. It mandates also that schools must allow males identifying as females, for instance, to access female locker rooms and sleeping quarters during overnight field trips without ever having to notify parents. And mind you, this is not a choice the schools have once they adopt this. They have to do this. Not only that, but it opens the door up for school-wide promotion of transgenderism throughout the curriculum, including science, literature, and history. Those are the words in the policy. And now every single K through 12 school, like I said, in the entire state is being pressured to adopt this. They've been told basically that they have to adopt something, quote, consistent or even more comprehensive. So of course, if you're just one parent that sees this coming at your school, that can seem pretty intimidating, like you're outnumbered by some pretty big guns, basically the state government. It's also intimidating if you're a school board member and you want to resist this kind of indoctrination coming into all grade levels. But, you know, as a school board member, you feel like you're going to face some threats of lawsuits or defunding. So that's what's happening. But here's the good news. We can fight back, and we are, with love, compassion, and boldness. We launched our Protect Every Kid initiative, which equips parents and local citizens to challenge their school board members that they have the right to protect kids' mind, bodies, and heart, every child's mind, body, and heart. And that it is possible to do this, to protect every child equally and fairly without sacrificing students' and parents' core constitutional rights on the altar of political agendas. It is possible to do that. And so we've made it especially clear also that every child without exception, including those struggling with gender, should be protected. There's no question of that. The problem with this policy, though, is it goes way beyond that. It crosses the line from just talking about protecting kids to actually pushing a radical sexualized ideology into every component of school life. So we launched this website, familyfoundation.org/protecteverykid. That's familyfoundation.org/protecteverykid if you want to check it out. And what we've done is made it really easy for people to access this site so they can share information with their school board members. We've got fact sheets on there going over what I just explained, a petition that people can sign for their school board members, as well as Protect Every Kid downloadable flyers, sticker designs, social graphic memes that people can use to come together as a community and really visually demonstrate that mission to protect every kid. We've also got some legal information on there from our legal center, the Founding Freedoms Law Center. And what it does is make really clear that this policy, if implemented, actually is going to harm more than help students. And it's actually going to make the school a lot more vulnerable to lawsuits than it is right now, you know, just based on potential privacy and parental rights violations. And we've already seen the news this week out of Loudon of a father that is saying his daughter was sexually assaulted, apparently by a male dressed as a female, in the school bathroom. So it's not hypothetical. But the good news is school board members are really resonating with the Protect Every Kid messages, and the communities are as well, because as it turns out, a lot of school board members are not comfortable with this top-down pressure from Richmond that not only is a one-size-fits-all mandate, but also leaves their kids more unprotected. A good example of that is what's happening in Russell County, a more rural community in southwestern Virginia. It's interesting because their school board members and their school attorney were actually provided with our legal information and factual information on the website that they were able to use that for consultation. But then the community itself used our free Protect Every Kid resources to really get behind the school board and help them stand strong to do the right thing, because this school board also was under tremendous pressure and getting threats. But the community had a Protect Every Kid community rally and then a press conference. And after that, after they had the rally and the press conference, they all filed into the school board meeting room that was happening that night to discuss this. And I mean, they were lining the walls, waving Protect Every Kid posters. And I guarantee you the school board had never seen that many people at one of its meetings in its history. And in fact, at one point, right before the meeting started, the crowd just broke out into spontaneous singing of what I think was an old gospel hymn, because I think they were trying to encourage each other to take heart and stand strong, and that went viral on YouTube. So if you have not seen that, I definitely encourage you to check it out. I also just want to mention one thing that I feel like helped parents a lot, and that was our Speak Up conversation tips that really helped parents have the confidence to articulate their concerns in a truth and grace manner. For example, there was a mom in the Russell County area that testified before the school board, and she made the point, guys, we have a pre-K through 7th grade school. How are you going to protect young girls if you are using these policies to allow access to 7th grade males identifying as females into these areas where young girls are? You can't supervise them every minute of the day. How is that safe? She asked that question, how is that safe? So those kind of strong testimonies combined with the demonstration of visual support really emboldened that school board to do something that had not yet been done, and that is they voted unanimously to reject the DOE policy and instead adopt a resolution strongly affirming parental rights and committing to protect parental rights. It was amazing, it was courageous, and we were able to take that example at the Family Foundation and share that with school boards across the state who were inspired to take similar actions. So all it took was that one spark of courage, which then caught fire, so to speak, with multiple school boards. And I'd say at this point, there's probably at least 17 who are also pushing back, doing something similar, either rejecting the policy or declining to vote on it, about 17 school boards at this point. So I just want to go back to my first 2 points. One, the power of people uniting around a proactive mission like Protect Every Kid. We have seen people coming together from different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions. You know, you've seen that in the Loudoun area, even teachers coming on board around this shared desire as a community to protect kids equally and fairly. And the second point is that power of 1 or 2 courageous actions to spur a wave across the state. Now let me tell you about one other part of this illustrates my third point, the power of speaking up together rather than in isolation. A lot of people don't know this part of the story I've been telling you, but this radical policy was actually supposed to go into effect as early as February 4th. But first, the state by law had to make it available for public comment. And then it was slated to go into effect the very next day after the public comment period ended. So we put out a call to action, and I'm so happy to say that thousands of Virginians answered that call. By the time it was all said and done, there were some 9,000 comments with an estimated 2 to 1 against the policy. So what that meant is the state couldn't very well greenlight the policy the very next day when the majority of parents on their own state-run website were clearly against it. So that resulted in a 30-day delay, which then allowed our legal team at the Founding Freedoms Law Center to file a lawsuit against the Department of Education's policy. Now, eventually, a judge dismissed that, but get this, he did so using in large part the reasoning that the policy was actually mere guidance. In other words, it didn't have teeth. And not only that, the State Attorney General's office actually argued against our lawsuit. They made an argument by saying they weren't going to go after the school boards to defend them. They confirmed that to the judge, so that's on the record. So we distributed that good news far and wide to school boards, and even more were emboldened to be courageous and do the right thing and not just rubber stamp this. But keep in mind, none of this would have ever happened if it wasn't for those thousands of Virginians speaking up at their school board meetings, speaking up, answering the call through public comments, and speaking together when it was going to count. So the point is, it's one thing for you to just sit in isolation at your computer as an individual and shoot one-off email to a school board member or a representative, but it's another entirely when you join that email with thousands of other like-minded people at the same moment when it's going to count the most. So I just want to end with encouraging you today that if you feel powerless and like you're just one voice and it's not really gonna make a difference, that is just not true. You never know how God can use you. All you have to do is just take that one step of faith, that first step of faith, and join your voice with others. And what better issue to do it on than protecting our kids at school?
Candy, that is great stuff. Thank you for sharing. And if you had to summarize that one piece of advice or encouragement for people as they think about getting involved, what would it be?
You know, one of the best things you can do is get connected with your state family policy council. There are organizations like the Family Foundation of Virginia in almost all of the states, and I would look at it as we basically can do the heavy lifting for you as far as, you as a mom or dad or grandparent or business person probably aren't going to have the time to wade through all these state laws, policies coming down at the school board level. And we have policy teams that are doing that. And we make it easy for you by sifting through all that, doing that heavy work, and then sounding the alarm where you can join your voice with thousands of others when that alarm sounds. Also, I mentioned the Speak Up conversation tips. A lot of these family policy councils in different states are constantly digesting what's going on and putting it out there to help you articulate your convictions to your neighbor or to an elected official. So I think that is an easy way for you to plug in and make your voice, amplify your voice in a way that's going to have a redemptive impact.
Candy Cushman, thank you for your insights and for taking the time to be with everybody here today. We move now to the other side of the country with Jonathan Keller in California. Jonathan is president of California Family Council, where he has been in that role since 2013. And despite being in a state that is really tough on a lot of the issues we deal with, especially the ones we're talking about today, he's had some amazing success in opposing some of these LGBT agenda items. That's been an encouragement not only to his fellow Californians, but to people around the country. And Jonathan, we would love to have you share about how some of those came to be and key lessons learned in finding some success in such a tough state as California.
Well, hey, John, thanks so much for having me today. It's great to be with you and with everybody else, such a distinguished panel. We are on the far end of the country, the left coast, as we like to call it. And that's a very apt description given our current political realities. I kind of joke, as you mentioned, I've been here since 2013. Before that, I was in pro-life leadership, running an organization here in the state for 11 years. And so for the last 18 years, it's a lot of defense. I kind of joke that it feels like you are playing soccer or hockey with a 100-foot wide net. So you end up spending a lot of time running back and forth, trying to block as many shots as possible. And again, for those who, my boys are not old enough to play soccer yet, but for those who have kids in soccer or who played themselves, that it's not technically illegal for the goalie to score offensively. It's just really, really rare. You don't see it very often. So I would say that's pretty similar to our situation. We have had very little success on the offense side compared to some of my brothers in Arkansas, Virginia, Pennsylvania, but we have seen some unique success, and God answers some prayers from time to time on the defensive side. And sometimes there can actually be a silver lining even to a bad bill being introduced and defeated, because it gives us an opportunity to use it as a messaging platform to talk about God's design for life, for family, for marriage, gender, sexuality, religious liberty. And on this issue specifically of gender and sexuality, we saw a real opportunity for that back in 2018. And there was a bill that came out at that season called AB 2943. That is probably still my favorite story of all the stories we've had. I was listening to Jerry Cox talk about the situation with the homeschooling bill in his state. It really is interesting for me to see how God uses sometimes these threats as a way to show himself strong in our own backyards. So in the case of AB 2943, we had a state legislator named Evan Lowe. He himself identifies as LGBT, and he's a former mayor from the San Francisco Bay Area, a little city over there in that region of the state. And he introduced a bill that would have banned so-called conversion therapy. Now, some people watching this, you may be very familiar with what that is, but if not, there is this really tragic misnomer among some people in the media. And I wish I could say that it was a mistake, but after all these years and attempts to correct it, I have to sadly believe that it's intentional. There is an attempt to malign and smear any attempt to offer loving, compassionate, biblically based counseling, support, and resources to someone who is struggling with unwanted same-sex attraction or unwanted gender dysphoria. there's an attempt to malign that as so-called conversion therapy. And you've even seen movies that have come out over the last few years, whether it's documentaries. Earlier this year, there was one on Netflix called Pray Away. A couple years ago, there was a drama called Boy Erased. And the entire goal of these efforts from Hollywood is to try to assert that any disagreement with the prevailing LGBT ideology from the left, or any disagreement with the idea that people can change, they can choose to live in a way that is congruent with their faith and their deeply held values, and not just with their feelings or temptations as it relates to sexual identity and gender identity. Any disagreement with that is fundamentally hateful or mean-spirited, or rejects the human dignity and the value of those individual people. And thankfully, we had an opportunity in 2018 to really push back on that. Essentially, what the bill would have done in banning conversion therapy is it would have said that there could be no exchange of money if you were trying to counsel somebody about their unwanted same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria. And the reason that was so significant is because it went beyond California's existing laws. Already, tragically, we have a law that bans young people before the age of 18 from seeking help from a professional to be able to overcome or to process some of the feelings of unwanted same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria. Well, this would have extended it beyond just minors to adults. And it was so broadly written, it would not only apply to a professional counseling situation, but it could even be construed to apply to pastors or to faith-based counselors in their offices, if there was any hint of a financial compensation. So, John, for example, something as simple as a marriage retreat or a men's retreat, if in the discussion of those sessions, you had someone talking about their own personal struggles with same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, and they said, this is how the Lord helped me overcome these issues, and you can have that same freedom in Christ. That could have actually been construed as something that was conversion therapy. And I'll use scare quotes. Since our friends on the left use scare quotes so much for things like religious liberty, I feel very justified in using it for a term like conversion therapy. But tragically, this really would have constrained the voice of the church, and it really would have made it much more difficult for people of faith, again, to lovingly and compassionately offer support and resources to people who voluntarily were requesting help with unwanted feelings of same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria. And the amazing thing through the course of this bill was that it actually woke up the church. Just like Jerry Cox said happened with those homeschool moms in Arkansas, we saw a very similar situation here in the state of California. You saw pastors, you saw lay people, and you saw for the first time, really, at least in the time that I've been here with California Family Council, we saw an incredible interest from a group that we kind of have come to know as formers. And formers are individuals, men and women, who at one time in their lives identified as a member of the LGBT community. And they are basically people who had struggled with same-sex attraction, gender dysphoria. In some cases, they had even lived as a member of the transgender community, cross-dressing and doing not, in some cases, even genital mutilation or sex change operations. But through the power of Jesus, they had come back to both faith in Christ, and they had come back to wanting to live in congruity with their biological gender, and similarly live in congruity with their sexual orientation, wanting to live as a husband or a wife in a heterosexual relationship. And the incredible thing was, I remember June 12th, 2018, we had a press conference on the steps of the Capitol. We had over 36 of these brave men and women share their stories. And throughout the entire time, it was remarkable to hear every story was different, but every story had a similar line running through it. And that was the power of God to seek and save those who are lost. And just to clarify for anyone watching, that applies to every one of us. That applies to me, my wife, Julia. That applies to my boys, a 4-year-old and 1-year-old. That applies to John and Jerry and all the other members of the panel. It's absolutely something that we're not saying that anybody that identifies as LGBT is a worse sinner than the rest of us. We are all in need of God's mercy, his grace, and his forgiveness. And the great thing to hear from those stories over and over throughout that day at that press conference was that each and every one of us is a child of God created in his image, and no single one of us is ever beyond the loving and compassionate reach of Jesus. And throughout the course of that bill, we saw other grassroots individuals, whether it was pastors, whether it was just lay individuals. In some cases, it was parents of children who had struggled with gender dysphoria and same-sex attraction. They all came to the Capitol, and hundreds of them spoke out in opposition to this legislation. And initially, we were very discouraged because the bill passed out of the Assembly. Then it made its way to the Senate. We kept pushing back. It passed its way out of the Senate. And it just needed a concurrence vote in the Assembly. And on the final day of the legislative session, we expected this to be an easy voice vote. All it would take would be the state assembly member, Evan Lowe, the author of the bill, to raise his hand and say, hey, I'd like to ask for your concurrence to read in these amendments. And yet, on the final day of the legislative session, he actually voluntarily withdrew his own bill, despite making it to the finish line. He literally withdrew at the last minute. And in his press release, he said, I've heard the voices of men and women across the state, of the faith community. And even though we don't agree on everything, even though I still have concerns about the status quo, I believe that we need to continue our dialogue beyond the restrictions of this legislative session. So as a result, I am pulling this bill, and I want to continue a discussion in the years to come. That was a massive victory. And we reached out to Assemblymember Lowe and let him know that we were grateful for listening and caring about the voices of people of faith. Now, again, I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture. He has continued to propose legislation that we've sadly had to oppose and fight against every year since then. But he has not reintroduced this bill. And it has been actually remarkable for me to see, even with Governor Gavin Newsom, one of the most aggressively pro-LGBT and progressive-minded governors in the country. Even with him at the helm, this bill has not been reintroduced. And it's just a reminder, similar to what Jerry Cox said out of Arkansas, we should never think that there is a situation that is too hopeless or too far gone, because you never know how the Lord is going to intervene. You know, in closing, one of my favorite stories from the Bible in the Old Testament, I mean, there's a lot of great ones. I love Daniel in the lion's den. I love David and Goliath. But one of the ones that I thought about in relation to this was Moses and the children of Israel standing on the shore of the Red Sea. And they had no reason to expect anything other than complete annihilation or total re-enslavement back in Egypt. The armies of Pharaoh and Egypt were bearing down on them, and the people are clamoring, and Moses goes and stands at the edge of the Red Sea, and he says, stand still and see the deliverance of your God. And we don't see it every single day in California. We definitely have had some horrible bills, even just this session, that tragically have been signed. There's one right now that we're preparing to work with friends to fight it, possibly all the way to the Supreme Court. But every now and then, we get to see God show himself strong on our behalf. And it's a reminder that the results are ultimately up to God. We are just responsible to be faithful and to be diligent in the tasks that he's given us to do.
That's a great story, Jonathan. One of my favorites of the last 2 or 3 years in terms of victories in difficult situations. And it's really a testament, certainly to your work. Thank you. But also to the power of the voice of the people. Yeah. When people speak up, they really can make a difference, even in places like California. If I'll ask you the same thing as I did the others. If you had to sum up one word of advice, piece of encouragement, what might that be?
Well, it's something that I've heard. I'll just apply it specifically here to California. I'm going to borrow from a new pastor friend of mine here, Pastor Greg Farrington, who's a pastor of Destiny Christian Church up in the Rockland area, and bringing it back to the modern day, the current day. We had a very disappointing situation with the recall election. I know I talked to a lot of Christian friends that were disturbed taking a position on elections, but many people I spoke with were concerned and distressed by seeing that Gavin Newsom was remaining in office. And the thing that Pastor Greg pointed out that I just want to echo was, if you're thinking of leaving your blue state because you don't like the elected representation, if you're thinking of moving to Texas or Minnesota or Montana or Idaho or Tennessee, if you're trying to get out of whatever situation you're in, maybe it's not even a state, maybe it's just a very dark blue city, just make sure that you know why you're leaving, because there are definitely times to leave, but at the same time, if California, in my case, is your Nineveh, don't let Texas be your Tarshish. We need to remember that God has called us to be salt and light. He's called us to be missionaries. And whether that is in the Middle East, whether that's in Asia, whether that's in Africa, or whether that is in California, you need to serve God where he has you. And remember that sometimes it's going to be hard, but he's going to provide the grace and the resources for you no matter where he's called you to serve.
A great word, Jonathan. Thank you again.
Thanks, John.
And thank you to all of our panelists. And thank you for being engaged in this particular session and throughout this series of sessions. I want to especially give you my word of encouragement and advice, and that is to get involved with your local state family policy council. We are connected. Family Policy Alliance is privileged to host about 40 state groups that work on these issues. Each of the panelists who have spoken today represent one of those state family policy councils. So we encourage you to check our website, go to the state organization in your state if there is one. If not, we'd love to hear from you about starting one in your state as well. Please keep commenting and sharing this video, and stay tuned also for the next session. Next session, you'll learn how to talk with your child about sex and gender issues. And we'll be back shortly.
So many questions on so many different topics. Why does it feel like I'm the only one in America that cares about traditional values? As quickly and sometimes covertly as government policy in regards to our children, school, and parental rights changes, what is the best way to keep abreast of all of it and to spread awareness of such changes? How do we protect our children? How do I find out what curriculum the school is using for sex education? How can we protect him while staying in public schools? I'd like to know positive ways to interact with my school board. How can we communicate to a secular society that gender choice is not healthy for society? How can I, as someone with little to no political background, be more involved in the public sphere? Do boycotts work? These are all really great questions, and we are so excited to answer them. You'll come to the right place because here at Family Policy Alliance, we have a vision for a nation where God is honored, religious freedom flourishes, families thrive, and life is cherished. And we firmly believe that addressing issues of our day is really critical. I'm Meridian Baldacci, and this is Ask Meridian.
Welcome, I'm Craig DeRoche, and welcome to Conversations with Craig. I happen to be that Craig. First, like to introduce Arkansas State Representative Robin Lundstrom, 5 leaders of amazing state-based organization. Jeff Laszlafi, president of the Montana Family Foundation. He's a great leader in his state. We want to welcome all of our viewers to the show today, where we're going to talk about saving girls' sports laws in America. Greetings, I'm Craig DeRoche with the Family Policy Alliance. Congressman Jody Heiss with us. John Stemberger, president and general counsel of the Florida Family Policy Council. The people on the front line of these fights are heroes. Joining me today is Congressman Mike Johnson, representing Louisiana's 4th District. Last but certainly not least, my brother, Gene Mills, down there, the president of the Louisiana Family Forum, because this is a big deal. And speaking of that family council in Arkansas, we are joined today by its founder and president, Jerry Cox. Today, we've got a great show for you. So today, we have with us Lane Conzatti. Jim, we're going to talk a little bit today about a controversy that's broken out with the Daily Citizen and Twitter. Today, I have with me Jonathan Saenz, president of the Texas Values.
We're so encouraged by your support, standing up for us in that moment.
Your work has never been more important than it is right now. So stay strong. We appreciate you so much. God bless.